You are standing in the heat of a Spartan summer, where even the air feels rationed. The stones under your feet have held the same silence for generations. Silence trained into boys until it becomes a reflex. Ahead of you is a sanctuary doorway, not grand in the way foreigners imagine temples, but heavy with the kind of authority that doesn't need ornament. A man is inside. He is not begging in a public square, not pleading before an assembly. He has done something smarter, and in Sparta, smart can be another word for dangerous. He has run into sacred space and touched the altar like a weapon. Suppliant, untouchable, protected by the gods, at least that's how it is supposed to work. But listen closely. Outside the sanctuary, the prayers are muted and bitter, like men forced to swallow their own fear. You can hear the scrape of stone as blocks are dragged into place, not to fortify a city against Persians, not to defend Greece, to seal a door, to turn a temple into a tomb. The guards take their posts. Leaders of the city, ephors, elders, men who have spent their lives policing ambition, refuse to break the sacred law by executing him in the precinct. They are just as determined that he will not walk out alive. So they choose a cruelty that satisfies both religion and politics: starvation. No spilled blood on holy ground, no polluted altar, just time, and thirst, and darkness, and the slow, humiliating collapse of a body that once commanded the strongest army Greece could assemble. Here's the thing that makes this terrifying. The man dying in that sealed sanctuary is Pausanias. The same Pausanias who led the allied Greeks at Plataea, the same commander who stood at the head of the coalition when Persian land power in Greece finally cracked, when the invasion's momentum died in the dust and blood of Boeotia. If you had asked a Greek in 479 BCE who saved Greece, many would have said his name without hesitation. And yet within a few years, Sparta decides he is not their savior, he is their threat. Their would-be tyrant, their Persianized traitor, their warning to every man who mistakes victory for permission. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand how a hero ends up walled into a sanctuary by his own people, you have to understand Sparta's deepest fear. Sparta is not just a city-state with good soldiers. It is a machine built to prevent one thing above all else: the rise of a single man who can overturn the system. Other Greek cities tell stories about tyrants the way you tell stories about storms. Terrible, but sometimes useful, sometimes even glamorous. Sparta treats tyranny like plague. Their political structure is designed like a set of clamps. 2 kings so neither can dominate, a council of elders to anchor tradition, and ephors, annual magistrates with sharp teeth, who can restrain even kings. It's a society that trains men to endure pain without flinching, but it also trains its leaders to flinch at charisma. And then the Persian Wars happen. Xerxes' invasion isn't just an army marching into Greece, it's a psychological catastrophe. It burns through the Greek imagination like fire through dry reeds. Cities are forced to choose between evacuation, submission, or annihilation. Sacred places are threatened. The word freedom stops being a slogan and becomes a physical need. The need not to kneel, not to hand over your children as hostages, not to have your laws replaced by a satrap's decree delivered in a language you don't speak. In that moment, Greek city-states do something rare and unnatural. They cooperate. Not because they trust each other, because they have to. Persia is not a rival polis. Persia is a world-sized empire that can buy, bribe, and bend Greek politics long before it needs to occupy Greek streets. Persian power can arrive in a harbour as a chest of silver, in a council chamber as a promise, in a factional dispute as money that suddenly turns one man into an army. So the Greeks look for leadership. On land, Sparta is the obvious choice. Sparta hoplites are not a bedtime story. Their discipline is real, their training brutal, their reputation a weapon before a spear even touches flesh. But Sparta's leadership comes with a price. Spartan command is rigid, suspicious, and often contemptuous toward allies who don't share Spartan customs. Still, in a crisis, the Greeks accept it. Better a harsh leader than no leader at all. And this is where Pausanias rises. Pausanias is tied to the most iconic Spartan legend of the war, Leonidas. He is Leonidas's nephew, a member of the Agiad royal house, close enough to the throne to taste its power, but not secure enough to relax. Leonidas is dead, turned into a symbol at Thermopylae. His heir is too young to rule as a commander. So Pausanias becomes regent, temporary king in practice, a man holding power for another, expected to be strong but never too strong, to act with authority but never to look like he enjoys acting with authority. A regent lives in a contradiction. If he fails, he is blamed. If he succeeds too loudly, he is feared. Plataea, in 479 BCE, is his test, and it is Greece's last chance on land. If you picture Plataea as a clean field where men march into neat lines and history is decided in a single glorious collision, erase that image. The campaign is a grind of supply and terrain. Armies move slowly because they are not just men, they are thousands of mouths attached to fragile logistics. Grain is life, water is strategy. Rivers and springs become battlegrounds before swords ever meet. Heat becomes an enemy that you cannot stab. Dust becomes something you breathe until your throat feels skinned. A hoplite's armor, bronze cuirass, greaves, helmet, can weigh enough to make every step feel like punishment. The helmet traps breath. The air inside turns hot and wet. Your sweat runs into your eyes, and you can't wipe it away because your hands are busy holding a shield that might be the difference between living and dying. There's a point in prolonged tension where the body starts to feel like it is betraying you. Legs cramping, stomach rolling, nerves frayed. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just drains you. Across the field, the Persian army is not a single uniform mass. It's an imperial machine, and part of what makes empires terrifying is that they can make other people fight for them. Persians, Medes, and many contingents drawn from across the empire. Cavalry that can harass and punish movement. Archers that can turn open ground into a death zone. Commanders who understand that the Greeks are dangerous up close, so you don't give them close contact unless you must. The Greek coalition, on the other hand, is a brittle unity. Spartans, Tegeans, Athenians, and others, men who might have been enemies a decade earlier, now forced to stand shoulder to shoulder because Persia is the larger nightmare. Their strength is heavy infantry cohesion, shields overlapping, spears bristling, a wall that advances in ugly, grinding increments. And at the head of that coalition is Pausanias. Ancient traditions describe a long period of maneuvering, missteps, and confusion before the decisive clash. And that makes sense. When two armies both know the stakes, both know the dangers of committing to the wrong ground, they hesitate, they probe, they test. They look for water and vantage points. They try to force the other into a disadvantage. Then the violence arrives, not as poetry, but as physics. When hoplites collide, it is not a clean duel, it is bodies compressing. It is a shove that feels like drowning while still standing. The Greeks had a word for this kind of pressure fighting, ophismos, something like the pushing, but that word doesn't convey the intimacy of it. Your shield is not just a tool, it's the hard edge of another man's world pressing into your ribs. You feel breath through helmet slits. You smell sweat, metal, fear, and whatever a man ate the night before. Spears stab and withdraw until they shatter. Then men fight with shorter weapons, then with hands, then with whatever they can grab. And somewhere in that chaos a commander is supposed to direct, not with modern radios, with runners, with shouted orders swallowed by noise, with standards, with the hope that discipline holds longer than panic. The Persian side suffers precisely because their strengths, archery and cavalry, are limited by the moment the Greeks force close engagement. Light armor and flexible tactics can win many fights, but a heavily armored wall that keeps coming can turn that flexibility into slaughter. The Persian general Mardonius is killed in the fighting, and the Persian camp becomes a trap. Fortifications meant to protect become cages when the wrong men are inside them. Plataea is a victory that shatters Persian land power in Greece. Not because Persia is suddenly weak, but because the invasion's credibility dies. The empire can still reach Greece, it can still influence Greece, but the dream of conquering mainland Greece by sheer force has just been punctured in the most public, humiliating way. Pausanias becomes the man at the center of that turning point. Now you would think that kind of victory makes you untouchable. In Sparta, it makes you watched. Victory does not just bring honor, it brings spoils, captives, connections, the smell of foreign wealth, and perhaps most dangerously, it brings the intoxicating sensation that your decisions shape the world. That sensation can rot a man from the inside, and the ancient world is full of men who win a war and then lose themselves. After Plataea, Greece's priorities fracture. Some cities want to go home, rebuild, and never see a Persian again. Others want revenge raids. Others want security through forward positions, strike Persian outposts, control sea routes, keep the enemy far away. The war shifts from defensive survival to offensive strategy in the Aegean. And in that new world, Pausanias becomes something he was never trained to be, not just a battlefield commander, but a political leader among equals. His post-war operations take him into places where Spartan oversight is weaker and temptation is stronger. And then comes Byzantium. Byzantium sits on the Bosporus like a hand around a throat. It is a city that can regulate movement between seas, a node that connects trade and military transit. Control Byzantium, and you can influence not just local politics, but regional logistics. It's the kind of place where walls matter, ships matter, and diplomacy matters as much as spearwork. The Greeks capture Byzantium in the post-war campaigns, and Pausanias, victor of Plataea, stands in that city with enormous authority, enormous visibility, and enormous opportunity. This is where the accounts start to turn dark. We hear of Pausanias behaving like a monarch, adopting Persian-style display, surrounding himself with a kind of personal prestige that looks suspiciously like a court. He is said to treat allied Greeks harshly, as if their participation in the war makes them subjects rather than partners. He punishes, he humiliates, he asserts dominance in ways that might be normal for an empire, but in a coalition of fiercely independent cities, dominance is poison. And then the whisper spreads, Pausanias is Medizing. That word is a dagger. In ancient Greece, Medizing is more than collaboration. It is the act of siding with the Persians or adopting Persian interests, and it carries the moral stink of treason. It tells the listener, this man doesn't just want to win, he wants to rule the way the enemy rules. He wants to replace Greek freedom with Persian hierarchy. Now, to be historically honest, the most dramatic pieces of the accusation, the secret letters, the promises, the alleged marriage arrangements, come to us through traditions that may have been shaped by later politics and moral storytelling. Ancient historians were not neutral. They were men with agendas, writing for audiences who wanted lessons as much as facts, so you cannot simply swallow every detail whole. But you also cannot ignore the core reality. Pausanias' behavior, whatever its precise form, alienates allies and alarms Sparta. Here's where Athens steps into the story with almost predatory timing. Athens, after the naval victories and the growing confidence of its fleet, is ready to lead. It has the ships, it has men like Aristides, whose reputation for fairness can make Athenian leadership feel less oppressive. It has Cimon, a commander who can win battles and win allies. And crucially, Athens understands something Sparta often doesn't. Alliances are emotional. People follow leaders they trust, not just leaders they fear. Pausanias makes Sparta look like a bad partner. Athens makes itself look like the alternative. The result is one of the most important pivots of the 5th century BCE. The shift of naval leadership away from Sparta and toward Athens. the early shaping of what becomes the Delian League, an alliance that begins as a defense against Persia and ends up becoming an instrument of Athenian imperial power. And notice how that happens. Not through a dramatic Spartan defeat, through resentment, through political disgust, through allies deciding, quietly at first, that Sparta's hero is intolerable. Sparta responds the way Sparta responds to threats. It recalls Pausanias. For Pausanias, recall is humiliation. It is also danger. He is brought back into the Spartan system, where even kings can be checked, where ephors can imprison men who step out of line, where prestige does not grant immunity. Accusations are raised, investigations unfold. Depending on the tradition, Pausanias is tried, released, watched, and then accused again. And imagine the psychological whiplash. One day, you are commanding Greeks against Persia, your name attached to the survival of Hellas itself. The next, you are a suspect in your own city, your actions reinterpreted as ambition. Every gesture becomes evidence. Every friend becomes a potential witness. Every silence becomes a threat. Then the trap tightens. Ancient accounts tell of evidence finally emerging in a form the Spartan authorities can use, something tangible enough that even a system cautious about condemning a royal regent can move. There is a tradition of a messenger or servant carrying incriminating material and fearing he will be killed to keep it quiet. The details differ, but the shape of the story is consistent. Pausanias is not simply rumoured about anymore. The authorities believe they can prove something. So Pausanias runs, not to an army, not to a foreign ally, to a sanctuary. This is a classic Greek move, and it is both desperate and clever. Greek religion is law. A suppliant at an altar is protected by taboo. Dragging him out is sacrilege, an act that can stain a community with pollution. Sanctuaries are supposed to be places where violence pauses, where even enemies have to think twice. Pausanias is betting that Sparta will hesitate. He is also betting that time will help him. Time to negotiate, time for factional politics to shift, time for fear to cool. But he misreads Sparta's priorities. Sparta does hesitate, but not in the way he wants. The Spartans refuse to execute him inside the sacred precinct. They refuse to spill blood on holy ground. They will not give the gods a clear reason to punish the city. Instead, they weaponize the boundary itself. They seal the sanctuary. Think about the cold logic of that. It is not a rage killing. It is not a mob. It is an administrative execution disguised as religious compliance. The ephors and elders can claim they did not violate sanctuary. They did not lay hands on a suppliant. They did not draw a blade. They simply ensured he could not leave. This is the Spartan state operating at its most terrifying efficiency. Violence delivered through procedure. Inside the sanctuary, Pausanias begins to understand what he has done. The altar that was supposed to protect him is now the center of his prison. The sacred law he invoked is being used against him. He can scream. He can pray. He can curse. None of it changes the biology of thirst. Time becomes the enemy. Minutes turn to hours. Hours turn to days. The body begins to ration itself. The mouth dries. The tongue thickens. The mind starts to play tricks, conjuring the taste of water like a torture device. Hunger arrives as weakness first, then as pain, then as a numb emptiness that makes even anger feel expensive. And outside, Sparta waits. That waiting is not passive. It is a statement to every Spartan watching. The state will endure, and it will crush anything that threatens its structure, even if that thing once saved Greece. The state is not grateful. The state is not sentimental. The state is eternal, and the individual is disposable. There are later stories, powerful, unforgettable, that Pausanias' own mother takes part in sealing the doorway, placing the first stone, choosing civic order over maternal love. That detail is difficult to verify with certainty, and it has the scent of moral storytelling. But whether literal or symbolic, it captures the truth of Sparta's self-image. A society that prides itself on putting the collective above the personal, even when the personal is heartbreaking. As Pausanias weakens, the sanctuary becomes less a place of divine protection and more a chamber where a man's ambition is stripped down to flesh. And this is where the irony becomes almost unbearable. Greek religion cares about pollution. A death inside a sacred space can be a crisis. So some traditions say the Spartans, calculating to the last, remove Pausanias from the sanctuary just before he dies, so that his final breath does not stain the precinct. Not mercy, timing. Not compassion, ritual accounting. Pausanias dies, and with him dies a particular version of Sparta's post-war future. The version where Sparta continues to lead beyond the Peloponnese, projecting power overseas, commanding allies in the Aegean. After Pausanias, Sparta becomes more cautious about extended foreign command, more wary of the political contamination that comes from prolonged contact with wealth, diplomacy, and imperial temptation. Meanwhile, Athens steps forward, and the Greek world begins sliding toward a new age. An age where the enemy is no longer Persia at the gates, but Greek power turned inward, Greek rivalry sharpening into war. And what does history do with Pausanias? It turns him into a warning. To some, he is the hero corrupted by Eastern luxury, a morality tale where silk becomes sin. To others, he is a scapegoat, a man too proud, too abrasive, too politically clumsy, crushed by a system that cannot tolerate exceptional individuals. The truth may be a blend. A capable commander whose ambition grew in the shadow of victory, whose behavior became intolerable to allies and threatening to institutions, and whose enemies used every available fear, especially fear of Persia, to justify eliminating him. But here is the deeper theme, the one that should sit in your chest like weight. Greek freedom is not a simple virtue. It is a constant negotiation between independence and control. The Greeks fought Persia in part because they feared being ruled by a distant king. Yet they also feared being ruled by one of their own, by the strong man who uses war and prestige as a ladder into tyranny. Pausanias stands right on that fault line. He wins at Plataea and becomes famous enough to frighten the very system he serves. He goes abroad and behaves in ways that either are or are made to look like monarchic ambition. He triggers allied resentment and helps Athens rise. He returns home and discovers that Sparta does not forgive threats, even if they come wrapped in the name of victory. He reaches for sanctuary, and Sparta turns sanctuary into a mechanism of death. So when you picture that sealed doorway again, the scrape of stones, the guarded entrance, the heat pressing down, you are not just watching the death of a man, you are watching the transformation of a world. You are watching the coalition of the Persian Wars fracture into the rivalries that will dominate the 5th century. You are watching institutions prove they can be as ruthless as any empire when they feel endangered. Pausanias saved Greece at Plataea. Then Greece, starting with Sparta, decided it needed saving from him, and maybe that is the most unsettling truth of all. Sometimes the greatest threat to a society is not the foreign empire beyond the horizon. It is the hero who comes home and mistakes a victory for permission to rule. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, more war, more politics, more human failure hidden beneath marble myths, consider subscribing. And I want to ask you something. When a state kills a hero to protect itself, do you see that as justice or fear?